Hello. It's September 2016, and this is episode 60 of the Unseen Podcast. For more information, please go visit unseenpodcasts.com. We are the unedited, unscripted, open participation spin-off of the Wow Signal. For more information on the Wow Signal, go visit wowsignalpodcast.com. So tonight I have with me on our panel Chris Profit.
Hi there.
Sam Lichtenstein.
Hello.
And Rober Wehbe.
Hello.
Okay. Now, tonight's topic should be no surprise to anyone. This week there was a big presentation by Elon Musk presenting his company's proposed Mars architecture. Chris, can you kick us off by sort of giving us the 30,000-foot view of what he talked about?
Okay, well, since basically the company SpaceX was founded, they've been pointing themselves at Mars. Really early on in the company's history, they started mentioning something called the BFR. I don't know if anybody's knows the Doom computer game where they have a BFG gun. Well, it's like that, except for it's an R. It's a rocket instead of a gun, right? But in any case, this rocket's designed basically to fulfill the corporate mission, which is to colonize Mars. So at the Guadalajara event, they basically had a big reveal of what exactly they've been working on, the design they've been working on, and in fact some of the technology they've been building to produce the BFR, or as it's been called more recently by Elon, ITS, which is Interplanetary Transport System. It's basically such a useful, it's a big beast of a rocket. It's such a useful system, they can use it to go to Mars, but use it as a stepping stone to get to anywhere in the greater solar system.
Let's do a comparison. This is bigger than the Saturn V, right?
Oh my goodness me. I mean, on average, it's about 3.5 times on anything, right? Except for height. It's approximately the same height. It's a little bit taller. It's 122 meters tall. So I don't know, Saturn V, what's that, about 115 meters tall. So it's comparable height, but it's a lot broader, right? So it's got a lot more volume in there. I mean, some of the figures are just astounding. The Saturn V is like 3,500 tons on the pad when it's wet, and the BFR ITS, however you want to term it, is like 13,000 tons. It's just basically two really big stages. One stage, the booster stage, has 42 engines. So these new Methalox.
I love that it has 42 engines. And now we know what the question was.
I didn't know if you were going to get that. I don't know if Elon insisted on that.
No, he wanted to call it. He wants to call the first rocket the Heart of Gold, right? So
yeah, that's right. Oh, but that's so unfortunate because of course the acronym is HOG, right? And it's a gross spaceship. Let's face it, that acronym is going to stick, I'm sure. But there you go. Anyway, it's 42 engines. It's got like 21 on the outer ring, 14 on the inner ring, and 7 at the very center. But only the center 7 actually gimbal. All the others are fixed engines. The center 7 are the ones which they use to control attitude and landing. So it's a big beast. It really is.
Now, this huge 42 rocket cluster that drives the ITS into orbit, it flies right back, right?
Yeah, that's the
and
point.
Lands on the same pad that it took off from.
Yes. That's the idea. I mean, basically, they've got that landing accuracy down to such a degree. I mean, they've been practicing landings at sea, which are the most difficult landings. Any sort of naval aviator will tell you, it's one thing to land on the land, another thing altogether to land on an aircraft carrier in a heaving sea. They've got that down and they've got it automated. They reckon they can land this big beast of a booster precisely on the launch pad, and then they don't need any landing legs. All they need to do is just drop it down, it'll be guided in, and then it'll be in a perfect place to be refueled, and off she goes again.
Now, so within 24 hours or so, they
yeah,
put a fuel tank or something like what do they
it's
call
a
it?
tanker stage on top.
A tanker stage on top of it, and shoot up and rendezvous again with the ITS, right?
Yeah. Next time it comes around, you got a tanker goes up to it, starts filling it up, and they reckon maybe 3 tankers, up to 6 maybe. They can get that the fuel completely refreshed in the ITS, ready to go on that long hard burn to Mars on the Trans-Mars injection. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
this is, as I understand it, this is the first time somebody's proposed using a purely chemical transfer.
Yeah, I mean, there's always proposals about, but this is the only one I've heard about recently. I know von Braun was very keen on the nuclear transfer. Well, that was one of the things that he sort of looked at for his Nova rocket design. I mean, yeah, it is really tough. But this is the cleverness of the whole plan by SpaceX. Basically, they're cheating the rocket equation, because they plan to take 450 tons to Mars. Now you can't do that with normal rockets. The rocket would just be, it'd be the size of Florida, all right. But if you could take the rocket up there and 2 stage, and the second stage empties all its fuel getting to orbit. Then while it's in orbit, you can refuel it entirely, and you can take extra payload and add that to it, right? You can get that 450 tons to Mars using a rocket that is a little bit smaller than Florida, although it is still relatively large. They've really thought about this. I mean, one of the things I was most impressed with is NASA have sort of been experimenting with HIAD, I believe it is, the expandable heat shield for entry into Mars, because you've got a big problem going into the atmosphere. The fact is that it hardly has any atmosphere, so you can get very, very small aero braking effects from it, and normally. Spacecraft as it approaches Mars, it's a very, very small, like metal pellet, and it just punches straight through the atmosphere, and parachutes are not much good because you got a high mass and very little atmosphere to decelerate. However, they've thought about this with the ITS, and when the stage gets there, it's going to essentially be like the size of a dirigible. It's ultralight because it's made of carbon composites, and when it hits the atmosphere, it just slows down really quickly, because it's such a large frontal area it's presenting as it comes in with a sort of aerodynamic descent, not dissimilar to the shuttle, but a much larger area, of course. It slows down real fast. Some of the figures they're talking about is like 4 to 6 G. Now, considering the atmosphere is only like 1% of Earth's, that's a big deceleration. And that saves them a lot of fuel when they get there. They might be able to minimize retropropulsion altogether, basically. NASA was sort of determined that the only way you can get down on Mars, a serious-sized payload, is to have some serious supersonic retropropulsion, which is firing the rocket in the reverse direction.
But SpaceX has solved that problem, right?
They've solved that problem, but they seem to have gone on from that and said, well, hang on a moment, we barely need that. If we can get this really large, like lifting body type entry, we can kill like 90% of our transfer.
Okay, I asked the question. How are we getting all this infrastructure, and what kind of infrastructure is coming from Earth to Mars? Like, that's transferring a lot of stuff, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about what we're transferring first. I know living ahead places to maybe recreation, stuff like that. I was just more wondering how much material are we sending up there in terms of infrastructure?
Okay, well, the simple answer is lots. 450 tons dropped by an automated mission in 2022. That's the idea, just to test out everything, make sure it flies to Mars okay, gets this stuff onto the surface, and then they want to make a methane plant and an oxygen refinery. They obviously want to test out their solar cells, I'd have believed, although they do have some on the actual the spacecraft itself, the hog. The name is here already. And
so the in situ refueling is something that has been proposed for quite a while. I think Zubrin has always had that as part of his architecture. I'm just wondering whether it's clear how massive the fuel plant would be, and whether it's feasible that could be launched on an earlier mission using Falcon Heavy and Red Dragon.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to do something like this probably in 2018. That's when the Red Dragon is due to go. And initially, they just thought they would be testing the entry procedure, but no, they're going to be putting some science on that. And because Gwyn Shotwell was saying, well, they're still sort of working out ways of getting it from inside the capsule onto the surface, and they're not going to be wasting those missions. They're going to be finding out everything they can about in situ resources, mining water, because it's all underground on Mars, and taking the carbon dioxide out the air. And then you have like a combination Sabatier electrolysis process, and you get out methane and oxygen. So
they'll be able to test that component on a small scale.
Hopefully in 2018. Yeah, absolutely. And then 2022, they'll send the big plant, which you need to make. I believe the fuel is something like 2,000 metric tons to fully fuel that hog. That's what they call it, a hog.
Just the first one is Heart of Gold.
Yeah, Heart of Gold. Yes,
which had the infinite improbability drive.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he's not referring to infinite improbability, but.
He said there was some improbability to it. So obviously,
anytime you put an architecture like this out, there are elements that are going to change, the purpose is to give yourself a broad plan within which to work. Right.
It's a breathing room, yes. I like the description of it, because he said it should be great fun to travel on the Heart of Gold. It'll have cinemas and restaurants and all sorts. It's that big.
It's not that big.
Well, it might be a very small cinema and restaurant, but in zero G, you can make a lot better use of available space, I suppose.
Okay, no comment. But one of the things that is going to be a big driver is how long it takes to transfer to Mars, which is a question of how much extra energy you can waste, right? I mean, if you go the most efficient trajectory, it takes several months.
Well, absolutely. I mean, they say that it's really hard to get it below about 3 months, because there's so much energy you require for the Delta V.
Right.
Even if you fully refuel it, you just can't go that fast and still have some fuel left for landing.
that's when we get into the nuclear thing, right? We have to go nuclear to get really, really fast transfers to Mars.
Yeah.
Because we have to have energy to burn.
High energy. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe they can get 3 months. I'm skeptical. Probably more like 4 or 5 months. And during that time, they've got to protect the crew from solar flares.
Its radiation is continuous in space. Galactic radiation is omnidirectional. It's going to come from every direction.
Yeah, well, the GCRs.
You've got to think about that. Yeah. But as I say, the major radiation source is the sun. If it goes pop, then if there's some sort of solar activity, then they really need to get in.
Isn't the plan to put back the fuel tank to the sun, and then I saw the solar rays. When I saw the solar rays pop out in the video, I said, "Oh, okay." So they're going to turn it so that the fuel is towards the sun, and they're going to need a lot of fuel to decelerate when they get there. And then, so there's going to be still a fair bit of methane LOX in that.
Yeah.
And then
I don't quite see how they're going to solve the problem of the zero-G storage, because that methane is just going to be big globs floating around in the propellant tank.
Well, there are ways to do that. I mean, every upper stage has to solve that problem.
Yeah. Well, it's done by ullage primarily.
Well, you do it with pressure.
It goes to one end of the tank. Yeah,
right. You do it with pressure, or you can do it with propellant management devices plus bladders are a very common approach, where you actually have a flexible membrane that pushes the fuel down.
Sorry, so what exactly is the issue? Is just getting the fuel into the combustion chamber when you're ready to decelerate?
Yeah, but there are ways to do that. I mean, it's basically a solved problem, but at this scale, it may be a little more complicated.
The problem being, if you use the fuel for radiation protection, it's going to be floating around all over the place during transit. You can't use your ullage, and although there's a mysterious type spherical tank in the upper stage, the heart of gold.
It might be a bladder tank.
Which could be a bladder, as you say, something they can sort of align themselves behind if there's some big solar event. So, we'll get to that bottom of that.
Well, you might have to put some shielding down there as well.
There's also water, right? I mean,
yeah, the water, including the wastewater, could be the wastewater and the water could be used to around the outside to provide shielding against GCRs. To some extent. I mean, there's still some risk, but this is not, I mean, we should talk about the safety profile here. This is not an airline flight to Disney World. This is a risky mission by people who are willing to risk their lives to go to Mars. And
absolutely,
it's more like a wagon train through hostile country. Conestoga wagons going 2,000 miles out west through the Oregon Trail than it is like getting on an airplane and waking up in Tokyo the next day.
There's a few thousand people who go.
Yeah.
After 10,000 people have gone, maybe.
Oh, you could get 1 million people that would be willing to volunteer.
I mean, the plan is, according to Elon Musk, to get the 1 million people on Mars by in 50 years. But I think that's a little optimistic.
Well, okay, but let's look at the SpaceX history, right?
Yeah,
they do what they say they're going to do, but they don't do it when they say they're going to do it.
Yeah. Well, as they say, they joke it's Elon time. He works on Mars time, where a year lasts 2 years for Earth, right? So you just got to apply that factor, Mars years to Elon years to Earth years. When he says 50 years, he means 100.
In terms of safety, and also in contrast with many previously envisioned or large Mars ships, this does not incorporate artificial gravity, as far as I could tell.
No, absolutely not. It's your bog standard spacecraft, and I mean, they have found ways to mitigate zero-G problems like bone loss and muscle deterioration through resistive exercise primarily, and the fast transit time will definitely help. The fact that you'll be in Earth gravity, and then 80 days later possibly you'll be under Mars gravity, which is only a third of Earth's anyway. So there shouldn't be. Hopefully, with the resistive training, they'll be relatively quick on their feet when they arrive there. But coming back to some of the problems that you were mentioning, the risk. I mean, they're not planning on putting people on it on the launch. Quite possibly, they're going to send them up later. That's going to be a big risk. The initial launch, of course, that's an obvious one. Again, refueling. Well, we found out there is possible problems with refueling. I think the highest risk segment of the mission will be the FTBA maneuver. where they come in on a sort of aerodynamic entry, and then they flip the bitch around, as they term it, and do the retropropulsion inside the atmosphere at high sort of supersonic. That's going to be the most dangerous segment as far as I can see, although possibly the landing will come a close second.
So you're saying the rocket will enter Mars' atmosphere nose first?
Well, it sort of comes in on a sort of gliding, very much like the space shuttle. Yeah, it sort of flat glides in, and then when it's bled off enough sufficient velocity, it flips around to do like a supersonic retropropulsion by the looks of it, from what we've seen, and then comes in for a landing. But that is going to be a high energy maneuver inside the atmosphere, a lot of turbulence, big ship, a lot of fuel sloshing around, engines burning. Oh, that's going to be the bit where people are going to be holding hands, I believe. It's going to be a fun ride. Let's call it what it is. And even when they're landing, they've still got about 5 or 6 story height to get down from the top of the rocket to the Mars surface. So I believe they're going to install a lift for that. That's the plan at the moment. But unfortunately, they wanted to sort of send it to Mars, unload the stuff, and then bring it back to Earth straight away. But during the same launch, the same conjunction window between Earth and Mars. But I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that because they're going. The time it takes to get to Mars is just too much. It's too far away during a lot of these conjunctions. The distance between Mars and Earth varies quite a bit, so it'll probably be too far away to do that return during the same conjunction. So they'll probably just send back the previous HOG that landed during the previous conjunction. I think that's probably what's going to happen, but plans are fluid. They might be able to squeeze a little bit extra oomph out of the engine. They have six Raptor engines on the second stage, outer ring, and I believe 3 on the inner ring. So the 3 on the inner ring are sea level rated engines with different thrust nozzles, so that they need those for operating in the atmosphere on Mars, and it seems like they're going to be landing on Earth as well, so they need a slightly different engine than the ones they use in space, which are the 6 on the outer ring. It's very exciting. I haven't seen anything as interested in this as this happening in space since I don't know, it's the 60s, and I got a long memory.
Yeah, well, let's sort of, I mean, we all want this to happen. We all hope it happens. But realistically, whatever the video Elon showed us this week it's going to be different by the time we get done with it. But
absolutely.
But it may not be that radically different. But let's talk about some of the risks and some of the scenarios where this could be a problem, right? That could cause problems for this approach to getting colonists on Mars. We talked already about the radiation, and basically, I think they're going to do the best they can to shield them, but they're going to take their. It's going to be more like
their dose. Yeah.
It's going to be like Iwo Jima. You get as many on there as you can, but some of them are not going to make it.
I have one thing that I think is a threat, and we're not thinking about it. Is what happens if SpaceX goes out of business when you're there?
Well, no, that's actually a very good question, because there's going to need to be some kind of assurance that the support systems that are needed are going to be continued, right? Something. Well, what they do when they're making a film, they have a completion bond, right? That is, some financially wealthy entity steps in and says, no matter what goes wrong, we're going to supply the funds to finish this work. So And
but this is colonization. I'm fairly optimistic that the colonists could become self-sufficient after, it's clearly a high risk lifestyle, but it's not clear to me that they'll be completely dependent on external resupplies for resources.
Well, that was the big criticism of Mars One, right? That they needed so many spare parts and so many. I mean, and what this was, by the way, a friendly criticism, that they'll need a lot of spare parts, that they won't be able to launch them all and get them all to Mars, and the thing will just not work because it,
but with such a dramatically higher cargo capacity, you could be a little bit more optimistic about sending the initial colonists with enough stuff that they're not going to be totally helpless.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I mean that has to be part of the thinking. You have to say, okay, you're going to be self-sufficient, including equipment failures, including things that could go wrong and will go wrong when you get there. So you're going to have to produce your own food and provide your own shelter and shield yourself from radiation, and all those things are going to have to be solved. And what we saw this week was largely the transportation approach to getting them there. And then you see this CGI where they open the door and they walk onto Mars. That's the hard part, right? Once they get there, that's the hard part. Figuring out the rockets that's within our reach. But then you have to figure out, okay, we just delivered what is it, 14 people or whatever? How many people are they thinking of sending in one shot?
Well, they're thinking of sending up to 100 people on the proper sort of liner runs, but initially it's going to be less than 10 because they're going to be hard driving engineers, the first ones they send. I mean, this is one thing in SpaceX's favor. They have some really good engineers, some engineers which know the system and are really flexible. They say there's two types of engineers. There's cooks and chefs. Cooks tend to follow the recipe, where chefs actually invent the recipes, and they just have the chefs at SpaceX, and these are the guys that are going to really make this homestead on Mars work. I mean, I can guarantee one of the pieces of equipment they'll send, it will be a 3D printer, because they're going to need loads of different things made up there, and not one of these plasticky ones. Probably
it's going to be a lot better than ones you can buy right now. Yeah,
a laser sintering one when you can make up titanium products with.
Well, you're going to have to be able to grab raw materials and convert them to refined materials, which is a non-trivial.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember from Kim Stanley Robinson's work, there's a fair amount of basic construction engineering that would be involved in preparing a long-term habitat. It would probably involve using Martian dirt as part of the radiation shielding, and there's just a lot of physical labor that would need to be done, and I'm sure they would try to use a lot of automation to make it easier, but. For 14, if it's 10 or 14 guys, it's a lot of work for them, those initial people trying to set up the infrastructure on the ground.
Well, I understand robots can lay bricks nowadays, so I don't see any problem really.
That technology is relatively new, but I don't know has that actually sort of been tested
on Mars? No.
Well,
no. On Earth.
It has to be tested on. Well, you're going to need technology to do some things and then people to do other things. And the trade-offs there are always going to be active. If you remember the film The Martian, right? He improvised using machines to carry his stuff across Mars. No spoilers here, by the way, for the free people out there who haven't seen it. But he improvised using the machinery he had. He never needed a superhuman strength to do what he did, or even he didn't have to be.
There clearly be a lot of work for JPL types, just designing. They know how to make Mars rovers pretty well now, but the type of rovers that are used for doing science, I don't know whether they're have the torque necessary.
Oh
for
no,
doing
those are purpose-built science rovers.
And so I don't think anybody's ever tried to design a Mars rover of the type that Matt Damon uses in The Martian.
You need a Mars pickup truck is what you need, which is electrically powered, and but that's all within reach of our current technology. We just have to. It just can't cost $1 billion like the Curiosity rover did.
Essentially, you're describing a Tesla. It's coincidentally, a partner company to SpaceX. They quite often exchange engineers and technology. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's some sort of tie-up there. The SUV will have a workover, a makeover. The Model X.
You do have the advantage that Mars gravity is less. So your weight won't have, you don't have to carry, but you have the disadvantage. There's no roads, right? So, and there's a lot of sand dunes to grind through. So, you're going to need, it's going to be a pretty significant engineering challenge, but once it's solved, I don't think it's going to be a big deal to create vehicles or mining rovers that can go out, grab soil and bring it back to, where it's needed. And you're not, unlike Mark Watney in The Martian, you're not going to have to cross hundreds of kilometers or thousands of kilometers of Martian territory.
Site selection will be a key issue for the initial mission planning.
They really need water. You can get iron anywhere because the planet's red. The color comes from the iron oxide in the soil. So you pick up soil, you're going to get iron, but the water, where that water lies in the subterranean sort of vaults, if they can find it on the surface, great, but that's going to be difficult around the equator.
It won't be on the surface, but you might have ice just below the surface you could dig into.
And there's an interesting trade-off there, because my understanding is that the North Polar Cap, my understanding was that there's more water ice expected to be near the poles, but obviously that raises a disadvantage when it comes to, you have less solar energy for powering your equipment. Right?
And also there's a slight problem with the temperature, that it's 70 degrees centigrade on average colder on Mars. If you're at the equator, it's not too bad, right? It's quite balmy around the equator. Sometimes it gets above zero. So, but at the poles, right?
I think you're going to want to be in medium to low latitudes, but there is water ice there. We've detected it.
Absolutely.
We just don't know the concentration, what the best place.
Concentrations, right?
So that may require some reconnaissance to find that. But compared to the cost of sending 10 people, the reconnaissance mission will be nothing. It'll be a small down payment on finding a site that has all your requirements is not going to be that hard, including good places to shield yourself, right? Like some nice rocky ledges and maybe a cave even, or an old lava tube that you can hide in.
Doming over a crater is often speculated, right? That's sort of a popular conception.
Yeah, you could take a small crater and put a bit of soil over it, and make some concrete, put it over there, and that might be sufficient shielding for a short period of time. Ultimately, you have to get down deeper, but
I would imagine that the initial habitat would probably be some sort of Bigelow type inflatable structure with probably dirt piled up around it.
Yeah,
just to provide some modest amount of shielding. And
there is an alternate view here. Elon did mention during his presentation that he's thinking about an electromagnetic type shielding, where you use a heavy sort of superconducting magnet to produce an artificial magnetosphere just around the settlement. And that should deflect a lot of the radiation, because the radiation is a primary problem.
Well, I'm skeptical that that's a good solution. I mean, even if we had those magical superconducting materials, which we don't,
fortuitously, it is very cold there. So if you want superconducting, it's not so hard.
It's not quite liquid nitrogen cold.
No, electrical energy is also going to be relatively scarce resources, certainly in the early days as well.
Well, they have the cells from the actual the HOG, which will generate quite a bit of electricity straight away, and then they'll probably have inflatable PE cells, solar cells, and I really can't see any way of avoiding nuclear. I mean, there'll probably be RTGs.
Well, the RTGs aren't that good. I mean, they only put out about 200 watts, but back in the day, the military made something called the SP100, which put out kilowatts, and
plutonium.
Yeah, it was basically a nuclear reactor. Now the RTG is a nuclear battery. It just gets hot and you use the thermal difference between the RTG and whatever the cold sink is to generate electricity. New Horizons flew one. It was about 200 or 300 watts and slowly declining in its capability. But you need that cold sink, which you have out in deep space. It's harder to come up with. I mean, you have a 3.7 degree Kelvin cold sink, which is, you're not going to get that on Mars. What I would hope that they could do is something like the SP100, which was a reactor. If you could build one of these things self-contained, it's going to weigh several tons. It's going to be heavy.
Right. I was just thinking, nuclear submarines use something like this. I would imagine the one in the submarine is pretty heavy, but you're looking for something intermediate between that and an RTG, right? But,
an RTG is not enough. It'd be easier to just spread out some solar panels. The only reason to use an RTG is if you're going to deep space, and you have a very small spacecraft with a low power payload. Even two RTGs, I think Curiosity's carrying one or two, but the power is not that great from an RTG, and they're very hard to build and very expensive, and the fuel pellets are extremely scarce. So, I mean, we're starting to make them now, but they're just not that good. A reactor, which, you're not going to have Greenpeace coming to protest about your reactor on Mars. It's not going to kill any fish. So you can just throw it out there in a crater and let it run.
Around now. I mean, I've been looking at a company called Transatomic, which is developing a 4th gen reactor, and basically it's a molten salt reactor, and most reactors just burn 4% of the fuel rods, and then they have to be refreshed. But there's molten salt, because it's circulating the fissile materials continuously. It'll burn those fissile materials down to nothing, basically. It can actually run on waste materials. So instead of wasting 96% of your fuel like you have in an normal reactor, you use 100% of it. So that sort of thing would be ideal for Mars, as you say. A nice big lumpy reactor just to pop down in the middle of the settlement, and that'll charge up everything. You
just throw it in a nearby crater. You run some cables from it, and you've got hundreds of kilowatts, maybe even more, maybe megawatts.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're not going to have a lot of copper wiring to spare, though, right? You're going to be living pretty close to this thing.
Well, you can always run a higher voltage and put in a transformer, but
you can always do iron. Iron wiring isn't ideal, but you're putting out so much power from these reactors. Who cares if you lose a couple of megawatts?
Well, it's just waste heat, which you can use to melt ice. Yeah,
I would expect the first 100 colonists to be purely reliant on solar energy.
I think the first ones will be all solar at first, yeah. But once you get to where you have 1 million people on Mars, you're going to need probably, the solar energy there is abundant. All right. I mean, the clouds are thin. It's not that far from the sun. It's roughly half the energy we get at the Earth, but there's plenty of land to spread solar panels out on.
And there's less atmosphere, as you say, to interfere with that sunlight. So hopefully you have a higher intensity when you
dust is an issue, but so you need to figure that out. But they've been lucky. Like Opportunity's been running for how many? 12 years now. Solar panels are designed to last 90 days. So if you just go out there and knock the dust off of them, they'll be all right. Or you can wait. Hopefully, you might even get some cleaning events. That's what they call a little dust devil on Mars is a cleaning event. But those, you can. I mean, the only question there is mass, right? You can fold solar panels up very compactly, and they're getting better all the time in terms of efficiency. But you got to unfold them, spread them out, run wires to them, and then you have to have some way to store the energy during the night. Which
lithium cells
that's a solved problem. Just a question of mass, right? And again, batteries getting better all the time. The battery, when I started my career in space satellites, we were using nickel cadmium batteries, and they were expensive and heavy. And now we're using lithium ion batteries, and they're cheaper. Even in then year dollars, they're cheaper. And they are, but in real dollars, they're very cheap, and they have much better capacity, and they can take a lot more cycles. And we're going beyond that too. I mean, the battery guys never cease to impress me with their ability to innovate and come up with better chemistries, better solutions. So,
thinking about making a joke about Samsung's exploding phones, but don't have much.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you overcharge a lithium-ion battery, it will blow up.
Which is a little bit of a scary thing on a spaceship, right?
Don't overcharge it.
It's a deflagration event. It's not a blow-up. It's deflagrating.
Right.
Well, some of NASA's flagship missions are flying lithium-ion batteries, but they have little. They're the cells, the cylindrical cells that have the little pressure relief caps, so that if they overcharge, they just pop off the cap. The cell fails, but you don't blow anything up.
Right.
Because actually, for a long time, we couldn't fly lithium ion on rockets because the safety people would say these things can blow up. And we would say, no, they're not going to blow up. How do you know they're not going to blow up? Well, we had to put these caps on them and so on. And we proved they wouldn't blow up. So, but apparently the space problem they have to solve in a cell phone is so severe that they've made them as small as they possibly can, and light as they possibly can, which means that they're not immune to overcharging, and they can catch fire and blow up. So you have to make sure your overcharge protection is extremely reliable. And apparently some people have not quite gotten that message, but the competitive pressure is so intense in that area that, I can see it might override some caution. Okay. We were talking about batteries, right? And power sources for the colonists. Maybe we've beaten that to death. I don't know.
Okay, well, I have a little bit more to add about the IAC announcement. I mean, basically, they had it was very human. The whole affair. It was people talking to Elon, another person, about going to Mars. There was no sort of big NASA sort of do where you can't talk to us, and if you want to become an astronaut, you have to do 1,000 hours in fast jets and so on and so forth. There was one lady there who volunteered to be an astronaut in exchange for kissing Elon, which I don't know how that transaction transpired, but I mean, at the moment, to be honest, they're not taking any names for Mars. They've had hundreds of people email them saying, I want to go. Please let me go. I'm special. But they're taking a very practical approach to the affair, and they say, well, let's get the technology right first, and we'll prove it, and then we'll start talking names and numbers. Who wants to go? Which I think is great. It's the right approach. Let's get the tech right first, and I'm sure that you'll always be able to find people. There's always some interesting people you can put on these.
You'll need a few years run up to get everybody ready. But I think there are probably a few years from having to actually go out and start interviewing candidates. About a year ago we had some Mars One people on the show, and talking about their interest in joining the Mars One mission. And that's Mars One has the same problem that. Well, I don't know the same problem, but a similar problem. What Elon is going to have was who's going to pay for this mess, right?
I think that's actually we were discussing risks earlier. I'd say budgetary risk is the biggest challenge this mission faces.
Well, it was nice that they were able to joke about it at the event, because at the top of the list of how to fund it was steel underpants, which I believe is a reference lifted from South Park.
The only way to make it work is to make it economically viable would be to put something industry up there, tourism, promote it, get people to go up there and bring the launch cost down per person really low. That's the only way it's going to work. You can't, even at $100,000, it's too much for a vacation. They need to bring it down to the point where the average person could possibly afford it.
But they don't need an average person. They just need a few thousand people, even in the long run.
All right.
So
fair enough.
So I mean, I could scrape together 100,000 if but of course I'm an old guy. They probably want younger people, but still, I mean. I'm guessing it's going to be more than 100,000 when all the shouting is over.
They said it was 200,000 as a sort of ballpark figure they're looking at the moment,
which is not an extraordinary amount of money considering what people have in their 401k plans.
It's not unachievable. That's right. Yeah.
401k, by the way, is a U.S. thing, but it's a retirement plan.
Okay. I mean, to be absolutely honest, how on the finances, I mean, he made it clear that he would really like to partner up with NASA on this one, because I mean, the way I see it, they can't avoid it. They've got SpaceX, all of that West Coast sort of spontaneity, creativity, individuality. But NASA has got the perfect counterbalance to that, which is the sort of East Coast planning, government, politics, preparation approach. So you put them together, it's the dream team. Well, and of course, NASA has the money.
The thing is, NASA does not have any cash that isn't spoken for right now.
Absolutely, but sooner if they start putting some of these components together, like they produced this big tank, I believe it's for the second stage already for the ITS, and they're testing it, a carbon composite tank. They start putting some of that stuff together, and NASA is going to feel a little bit squeezed to be left out of this event, because they really need to be part of the whole affair, just from a purely political point of view. Right,
well, from a science bang for buck point of view, some missions like the Europa, I think some missions are going to start looking a little bit silly when Elon's saying, "Here, I can get 20 tons and 10 astronauts down to Mars and do science."
I mean, the 2018 mission is 10 tons on its own. That's 10 times more than NASA has ever placed on Mars, the Curiosity rover. And they're saying that they can use that same Dragon to go anywhere in the solar system, basically. So,
the mere existence of this technology could potentially have some pretty interesting political ramifications for NASA.
No, absolutely.
But
I mean, Elon was quite open about it. He says, well, it's not a question of them or us. It's a good idea to have multiple ways to get to Mars. If they want to proceed with the SLS plans, great, because there's no 100% guarantee his plan will work, right? Always good to have a backup, a contingency. So, although
see,
to be honest,
that's kind of asymmetric, right? Because NASA cannot say their plan won't work, or it might not work, right? And Admiral Baldwin really recently came out saying he wasn't a big fan of the SpaceX Mars plan.
Private, yeah, well, private enterprise, yeah. But if you look at the hardware, the SLS is basically a big brother to the Saturn V, and that's a rocket that's designed to go to the moon. Right, it's ideal for doing cislunar work. But if you want to go to Mars, you have to go that little bit further. And you've got to take a little bit more. You've got to be there for 2 years.
The ideal is the SLS, the launch rate and the cost per launch is the launch rate is poor and the cost per launch is high.
How high is it? Like several $100 million?
No, billions.
Over $1 billion.
Yeah, it's like it's worse than the shuttle.
I mean, NASA has said that it's going to be 500 million, but that is really it is a little bit risible.
Don't believe that.
I mean, but you're right. The launch rate to get to Mars, say, you need 10 to 12 missions, right? They're launching 1 or 2 a year, so you're talking, 6 to 12 years to get all that technology on Mars just to stay there for 2 years, right? Which you need to, because you have to go Hoffman transfer. So Hoffman transfer. So it's all not very clear at all how NASA are going to be able to do that with SLS. That's why I say SLS ideal for the moon. You can go there. The payload is great, but 40 tons to Mars to last 2 years, it's going to be really tough.
Well, SLS might be okay for things like the Europa mission, where you're going to spend a ton of money, but most of that budget will be off of the Europa budget. It will be onto the SLS development budget. So it will look like it may look like a $500 million launch. It's probably going to be more like $1 billion launch, but it's actually, that's not amortizing the many billions of dollars that have been invested in SLS up to that point.
Building up the program, yeah.
And my guess is that that's what they'll go with, because they can't say we wasted $10 billion.
SLS has to go somewhere, but that's the good thing about it. It's always been really so fluid about where it's going. It's going to an asteroid. It's going to the moon. It's going to some moons of Saturn. Right? It can easily realign. They can do what they like with it. But to be honest, SLS is it's like a dead man walking, because it has no reusability. So ultimately, it can't stand up against a rocket like even the Falcon, which you can land it, reuse it, land it, and reuse it. So if they can put that same technology on the ITS, the reusability, that it's just it just blows it out the water.
The trick of the ITS is the booster comes back, right? Grabs a giant fuel tank, and flies back.
Yeah.
Now,
back.
that is not trivial to pull off, but they have already demonstrated that it can land a booster.
And they've already demonstrated those boosters are perfectly functional. They've been firing one day in, day out at their McGregor test facility. They give it a little break where they had to test another rocket, but they go back to testing, and it seems to be working fine. So the only question is now, end of the year, when it flies, is it going to be okay? They keep selling it as flight proven hardware. So it's not a used rocket. It's a flight proven rocket now, which is great. Yeah, as you say.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure
the thing is that in a way, SpaceX has gone back to the 1950s and said, we'll fly a little, test a little, fly a little, test a little. We'll have a lot of failures, and then, like they did with the Of Course I Still Love You barge, right? They had a lot of
test as you fly. They call
not just test as you fly, but fly a lot, fail a lot, fail early and often, and then fix it. And this is the way X-planes were done, right? But the NASA culture is you cannot fail, which is going to cost enormous amounts of money to make sure that flight 1 is equal to flight N and is failure proof, which of course we know from the shuttle that's really not the case, right? The shuttle was pretty successful. It had a pretty good flight rate, but they did lose 2 of them, one on ascent, one on return, and in both cases there was a lot of self-deception about how safe it was. And
don't even get me started on the space shuttle. I heard some really interesting rumors about that, about why it actually failed. But it all to do with the quality testing people over-testing it and stuff like that. But we'll never know.
The cost of the space shuttle was high. The per flight much higher than was advertised to Congress back in the 70s. The success rate was nowhere near what people had convinced themselves they could achieve. NASA, after the Challenger disaster, NASA convinced themselves they had developed a new safety culture that was not going to allow that to happen again. And then Columbia happened, right? So the problem you get into there is if you keep adding layers and layers and layers of assurance, you add lots and lots of cost.
And did you see the Dan Radske video? I gave you a link for that. It's a NASA guy, and he went out to SpaceX to help them start up their program to make PicoX, the heat-resistant material. And he said he was in a meeting with them, and they were just he was completely shocked. They had all the department heads, and each one of them said, "Well, this is what we think we should do with the PicoX." And then Dan Radske was last to go because he was being diplomatic. And Elon says, "Yeah, okay, that's what we'll do." And everybody walked away at that point. Normally, he said there'd be like layers of committees and months and months of consultation with everybody, including the guy who's sweeping the floor. And then eventually they come up with some grand plan, which may or may not be anything to do with the ideal path whatsoever, but what everybody was happy with doing, and it was a complete shock for him. He just couldn't he says, "Well, where's the rest of the meeting? When are we going to do he says, "No, we're building it now. We're building."
Yeah, well, and you could see why Elon has resisted going public with SpaceX, even though he would make a ton of money if he did that.
Well, that actually,
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm sure they're cash flow negative, right? At this point.
No, actually,
no.
I think you'll find that the profit they make is entirely reinvested into the company, so that minimises the profit declared because it's all put back into development.
It's private. It's privately held, so
I believe that their satellite launch business is profitable. And the resupply missions to the space station, etc.
Oh yeah, those are profitable for sure.
But for the funding, the development of this over the next 10 years, let's say, it's going to.
It's 10 billion. 10 billion they need. Yeah.
$10 billion, right? And I don't think their other businesses are turning out that much money, right?
Absolutely. It's gonna be tough squeezing 10 billion out of SpaceX during that time period.
Yeah, that's
also developing another system, which is the satellite for internet satellites in low Earth orbit. So you've got 2 mega projects going on in parallel, which is the ITS and the internet satellite. So they're going to be financially stressed. That's for sure.
I think the internet satellites that's going to require partners to pony up a lot of cash.
But I actually think that's the backdoor funding mechanism. He actually envisions a longer time horizon for the.
Well, yeah, exactly. It'll generate huge amounts of cash, but it's not generating it now. It's actually taking it out of the pot. This is the problem. They've got this squeeze, this pinch at the moment on finances. So
the question is, do you think NASA is going to step in within 5 years, say? And
Well, now you're talking about politics now, because NASA doesn't step in unless they get some support from Congress, and Congress will probably need some direction from the president. So pick a president. It's up to you. One of them's going to be.
We tried that. We don't get any good results.
They always get bans, but one of them will probably support, and the other one maybe not so much. Maybe a bit slower. I mean, it's up to you.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, there is a very ponderous political process underlying all that, and NASA can't step in without that. And
right.
even if they wanted to, which right now I don't see any evidence they really want to.
Right. So suppose no such support is forthcoming. What do we think the prospects for this ITS development are in the near future? I mean, Musk is clearly passionate about it. He's not going to completely drop the project.
But he could fund it with. If you take everybody in Silicon Valley who thinks space is cool, he could fund it with their petty cash reserves. I mean, there's
a lot of underpants in Silicon Valley. Yeah, but
it's amazing how much cash these guys have. And so, I mean, that is the thing. The Earth, human race is getting wealthier. We are producing more. This kinds of ventures are becoming more and more feasible. You still have to go out and beg for money.
I mean, I wouldn't say.
But there are more people who can beg.
I mean, a good example would be, I think it was 2015. Larry Page, Google sort of turned up at the SpaceX door and said, "Well, we hear you need some money. Us and Fidelity, we could probably chip in $1 billion, if that's any good." And Elon says, "Well, we actually closed. We're not sort of doing any share deals, but if you want to do $1 billion, well, yeah, we'll give you some shares. We'll give you 1/10 of the shares of the company." So the money is available. I mean, Larry Page says if he dies, then he wants to give all of his money to Elon, basically, to SpaceX, because he knows they're going to use it.
Yeah, but, well, $1 billion is
crosshairs is on Larry Page.
$1 billion is mad money in Silicon Valley. $1 billion is what they spend on an office building. I mean, these days a football stadium costs $1 billion.
So we're thinking that it's likely that Elon's gestures towards working with NASA were mostly just kind of trying to be nice, but realistically, he envisions a privately funded.
Well, I think he wants them not to be in the way, if nothing else.
Yes, an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I mean, he's going to find some money. He was talking about Kickstarter and all sorts of deals. Interesting approaches.
Yeah.
He's going to find some money. He's going to build some big components, and it's going to put more and more pressure on NASA to sort of not be left out, not miss the boat sort of thing, because NASA cannot afford to miss going to Mars. If they go to Mars and NASA's not part of it, I mean, the obvious question at Congress is, why do we have NASA? What NASA is, is old technology.
I think that
behind the times.
NASA's charter is not really colonization or settlement. NASA's charter is science and technology and exploration.
But they've always grabbed this sort of thing. They've been at the forefront of driving the technology, and we're the only ones who can do it. If somebody else can do it, interesting times for NASA.
But they've always used private industry to do the rockets.
But they've always operated on themselves, though. They've always been very, very conscious of the political side of things. Look, these are our rockets, and we are launching them from our launch control. If somebody else does it, well, that's a different situation. So sooner or later, I think there will be an alignment with NASA. It's just how much they have to turn that screw.
There are things like we discussed about earlier, like the reconnaissance of the launch site. That's something NASA could do very well. I mean, the landing site. I'm sorry, the landing site.
They have satellites in orbit now, which they can take perfectly good photographs, and they've got hydroscapes. They've got ways of detecting water up to 1 meter underground. So it's all doable.
And not just NASA, but ESA and Japan and China could also get involved in that.
What about has NASA actually done any work on habitat development or anything like that? Large scale hydroponic farming? in a Martian environment. I mean, that's the sort of support research that there's definitely science involved.
I saw a project, I think it was Arizona University, where they're sort of having a combination toilet and a sort of growing sort of farm, which is an interesting combination. And I think it's aquaculture, something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean that's really and NASA has always worked closely with universities. Like JPL is actually owned by Caltech, not by NASA, but you wouldn't know that from listening to the JPL propaganda.
Interestingly, the SpaceX guys did actually turn up at this Arizona University recently and just ask them about what it was exactly they were doing there, and how applicable it would be to Mars, presumably. So who knows? We might see a bit more action on that front. It's all formative, but they do have almost 10 years. So the speed that SpaceX work, they do like up to 100-hour weeks. They can get a lot achieved. If you don't sleep like Elon, you can get a lot done.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that they use a lot of talented young people, and they really work them hard. At some point, that will cause burnout, but you can go for a few years like that,
Well, I believe their director of the special project, Steve Davis, has been doing 16-hour days for years. Some people can and some people can't, but as you say, burnout, big problem.
Well, if you don't have anything else in your life, it's pretty easy to put in 16 hours a day. But it will kill you eventually, but unless you're made of tougher material than most other people. But the reality is that it's really not a question of working yourself to death. It's really there's a lot of things that have to be gotten right, and there's a lot of problems that have to be solved, and some of them have nothing to do with rockets. Most of them have nothing to do with rockets, except how much mass you need to carry on the rocket. Right? The things like, how do you grow crops on Mars? How do you, what's going to happen when somebody gets sick? What's going to happen when a baby's born? That sort of thing.
That's the big problem. Can people have children on Mars? Because that's how you're going to get to that 1 million within the 50-year time frame.
Well, I mean, people know how to procreate. The question is, we did it a long time before we understood how it worked, but there are risks that we haven't even thought about, right? That we don't even know, aren't even aware of yet. And there's a lot of unknown unknowns, and you're going to have very, very flexible, resilient people that work through those problems. And,
absolutely.
And it's just those are going to be, and people are going to die, and which they have. We've been dying on pioneering enterprises since human beings were human beings. We've been saying what's over the next hill and going over the next hill and finding out that it was tigers for hundreds of thousands of years, right? But and we somehow survive. We get over the next hill and we get on the next hill after that.
I'm thinking of the Polynesians, which just basically pushed off in a small dugout canoe and just kept paddling until they came to somewhere. It's very similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're gonna make it or not, but if you do, you're probably going to find some island paradise. Well, I don't know.
Those people were incredibly skilled and incredibly brave and resilient, right? They knew how to survive in the open ocean. They knew how to survive when they got to where they were going. Well, they didn't know where they were going, but they just knew that if we keep paddling, we'll eventually
somewhere.
We'll find some land that we can settle on. And it worked for, ultimately, probably a lot of them did die at sea, but ultimately enough of them got to where they completely populated the Pacific.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And until you white European types came in and made life miserable for them, they were doing just fine.
Yeah. Hawaii is supposed to be a garden spot still, so it's not quite paradise lost yet.
Yeah. Well, it's mostly fat tourists coming there and spending their money, but
it's interesting to speculate about what the economic purpose of the Mars colony would be.
Well, economic short term, there will be none. There'll be no. I mean, they might have money, but they'll have no point whatsoever to have money on Mars, except for. I mean,
even Elon gestured towards it. Like one of Mars's appealing features is its smaller gravity well, right? And
38%.
So if asteroid mining or other space intensive type of space activity takes off, basing it from Mars in the long term might be an economically viable.
Well, I think that's possible, but that's going to be a very long term thing. It's going to be way beyond anybody's investment horizon.
Sorry, Paul, I've got to disagree with you here. I mean, this is part of the thing about the ITS presentation. He says, well, once you get to Mars, you can use the same system to send a propellant plant onto Enceladus, onto Pluto, wherever you want to be. And you can use the same system to basically explore the greater solar system.
Well, so, exploration is one thing, but he was asking about economics.
Right, that's colonization. As a scientific platform, ITS is clearly very interesting, but
well, there are some asteroids out there in the asteroid belt which are supposed to be made of solid metal. They're like a planetesimal core, and some of the platinum groups, they've got some very interesting properties. If we had a huge amount of some of these platinum materials on Earth, it could completely transform our technology, the way we approach technology on Earth. So it is possible. It is doable. You can move around large masses in space using the interplanetary transport network, the interplanetary superhighway, some people call it. It takes a lot longer, but you can get stuff about, and it doesn't cost you that much delta V. So the possibilities are there, and I know Luxembourg are giving a whole bunch of money to deep space industries and some other people.
It's a few $1 million. It's not that much money. But.
Well, 245, I think, was euros was the last time I checked in on them on this one, and they're saying there's lots more money available if they need it. So there's lots of possibilities opening up here, and Mars is going to be very strategic because it's right there on the edge of the asteroid belt, and after that, it's close to the outer solar system. It's got a low gravity. You got all the materials you need. It's going to be a fantastic location. It's a strategic location for mankind.
But I think you're talking very long term there, though. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think the answer to Sam's question is short term. There is no economic. There's no reason. You're not going to be able to convince an investor on Earth that he's going to get his cash back. If he goes,
you need something on Mars to draw people. You need
people are going to go there because they freaking want to, right? We're going to go there because we the same reason that my ancestors came to the United States. They came here because they wanted to, because it wasn't the United States then. It was whatever they called it back then, but it was
freedom.
Well, they came for freedom. Actually, my ancestors.
Freedom is probably the reason why I would be likely to go to Mars. But some of your ancestors came to the United States because there was a
whole lot of farmland that nobody else ownned, right?
A lot of unused farmland and they
could live the way they want.
Like beaver skins, Yeah.
My ancestors were.
You could get to the pole. You could get to the pole. That's where you wanted to be, didn't you? On the. Well, no, this is my pole.
My ancestors were many of them were Quakers, and they were not treated well in England, and they prefer to go. But so they did go for freedom, but they also went because, all the farmland was owned by someone else in England, and they could just go to they could go to America. Well, at that time they called it Rhode Island or Virginia or whatever. And there was just all this farmland, and you could make your own life there. You could make whatever you wanted. It could be whatever you wanted it to be. And that is incredibly appealing. But are you going to be able to tell a banker in New York if you give me $20 billion, you're going to get $30 billion back in 10 years? No. You're not going to be able to tell them that.
Right. Well, but so that's why this is challenging, right? Because those colonial expeditions to the United States, the 13 colonies, were funded by London bankers. Somebody had to buy the ship.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? Nobody knew what the killer app was going to be until tobacco started coming back, right? And that was the killer app for the New World.
Right, but so it's in this case we kind of know more or less what resources are likely to be found on Mars, right?
Well, it's not going to be tobacco.
Well, I tell you one thing that they'll be able to do on Mars, and that is they'll be able to send scientists, because Mars is a very interesting planet. It was very much like Earth in the first couple of billion years of existence. So maybe there was some life, maybe there wasn't. But finding out why Mars actually stopped being possibly a habitable planet, that's going to be a very interesting research topic. There's lots of stuff we can look into on Mars. So one of the first couple of flights, I think you're going to see quite a few scientists from all sorts of institutes and groups just going out there and having a look, because we know nothing about planetary science. We only know about Earth, and we only know what goes on at the surface. We can find out a lot more from having a second case to investigate, finding out how.
I agree with everything you're saying. I just don't think that science will be an important economic driver of the project. At the end of the day, I think Paul's right that freedom will be important, but maybe ultimately the terraforming, on a slightly longer horizon, it's about making new land, new fertile land. So the original colonists.
Yeah, well, that's Virginia already. Virginia was already a beautiful, fertile land, but right, Mars isn't yet.
But we think that in 200 years we could start making a difference, right?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Well, there's a fast route and there's a slow route for terraforming. I mean, Elon's saying you can explode, sort of have a nuclear explosions over the poles and melt the poles, and that will raise the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and raise the temperature due to global warming and stuff like that. And there's even more radical plans, like my own one, which involves reinvigorating the nuclear core of the planet. Because
I think that's something more sensible, like introducing methanogen species into the soil that would put a lot of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
So I think there'll be a reason to do that stuff quickly. People will want to.
We can probably terraform Mars, a lot faster than we can terraform Venus. So.
Yeah, and I'm for it. I know there'll be a lot of ethical controversy about that, but
Elon's actually sidestepped that, as he says, well, terraforming, that would be a decision entirely up to the colonists, right? Nothing to do with Earth, because it's their planet at the end of the day, and they've got to stick with the consequences. I mean, some of the plans, there will be consequences. You can't sort of rip up a planet and say, we're going to have a completely different way of operating your ecosystem today. So interesting times again.
It would be a slow transition, I think.
Yeah, certainly not.
I hope so.
Nothing you'll be able to see in less than 50 years, right? But but
you got all the CO2 ice at the poles. If you can find a way to get that CO2 ice into the atmosphere, things will get a lot warmer quickly. So, that what you need a feedback. The feedback would presumably be the water that's frozen in the poles and other places that would become water vapor in the atmosphere, because CO2 by itself only warms the atmosphere so much, but then it creates enough warmth that it other things like water vapor and methane come up into the atmosphere, and then you get a massive amplification of the CO2.
Well, it's a cascade warming effect, a runaway warming.
Now we don't. We don't really understand
it sounds bad on Earth, but when you're talking about a planet that's minus 70 degrees on average compared to Earth, cascade runaway global warming is quite good.
Well, you can be tough to get to run away because you don't have enough solar insulation. You just hope to get maybe the equatorial regions warmish, so that you can grow, and enough atmospheric pressure that you can get water flowing on the surface.
Well, it won't be a runaway like we have on Earth, where we're talking about water evaporating in the atmosphere. But if you can get that frozen carbon dioxide to get up in the atmosphere, as you say, you're going to see a big spike in global temperatures.
Not only that, but atmospheric pressure would go up, so you'd get.
Yeah, absolutely, because carbon dioxide is heavier than the normal atmosphere. So you get pressure and heat, and you might be surprised how much heat is actually retained, even though it is like half the sunlight we normally receive on Earth.
Full disclosure: I'm reading David Grinspoon's book, which is now in not out yet. I was sent a copy of it. He talks about how are we ready for terraforming. He didn't think we're ready for terraforming because we don't understand the process well enough yet, but perhaps in 100 years we will be ready because we'll understand what those effects would be. He even thinks that maybe terraforming Mars might even be like a good rehearsal for geoengineering. So if we need,
I don't think they should even try to terraform Mars first, because you should try doing it on somewhere like Ceres or Vesta, just to see whether you get the technique down. Because if you mess up on Mars, there's going to be people living there. It's not going to be sort of thing where you just turn the clock back and reset to where you were in the program before.
I think you got to just do it. I think there's no way to transfer. I think you just roll the dice. Start the process. It's a slow, steady thing. And
okay. Well, we're I know we've had a couple interruptions tonight. I'm actually going to have to do something I don't normally do, which is edit this podcast. Take out, because I had power outages here in Maryland for reasons that are not clear to me. But anyway, let's kind of try to wrap up a little bit and summarize our thoughts. I don't think we were going to talk about light sails tonight, and but that's such a big topic. I don't think we're going to quite get to it tonight. I mean, I think that light sails may ultimately be a really good way of moving cargo around the solar system. Not people so much, but cargo. But it's a very immature technology, just starting to get some sense of how to do it. I mean, the physics is not controversial. It's only the question of how do you build a really big light sail. Let's
maybe come back to that next.
The thing is, people don't understand that scaling up is hard. Scaling something by a factor of 2 is hard. Scaling something by a factor of 1,000 or 100 is really hard. I've really been thinking about light sails the size of Texas, like 1 million square kilometers, which is actually bigger than Texas. Such sails would be enormously useful if you could control them and use them the way I'd want to. I mean, you could take a pretty big payload on them and move them around where you want. But I don't think we're going to get to that tonight. I know that's what you want to talk about, Roger, but I promise we will get to that at some point. So let's kind of wrap up our thoughts. Let's start with Roger. You want to start? Final thoughts for tonight?
Yeah. See, Roger's muted.
Roger, you want to unmute? Okay, well, let's start with Sam then.
Final thoughts? I guess I'd say color me interested, basically pretty skeptical that we'll see a large-scale colonial mission I do believe Musk is likely to get us to a manned mission to Mars relatively soon, let's say by 2030. Whether that will generalize to a sort of genuine colonial venture, let's say by 2050, I'm less confident in that. Although I was obviously very excited by the architecture announcement, and it was great to sort of get something optimistic to distract me from the election season political morass. So
yes, indeed.
That's my basic view on the matter.
Okay, how about you, Chris?
Well, I'm a little bit more optimistic than that. If you go to Mars, you have to plan to go there for 2 years. If you're going for 2 years, you're basically establishing a colony, as far as I can see. Yeah, they're going to have low numbers originally, but once they got that system set up, that interplanetary transport system, well, you're going to see numbers start to move out there. Everybody and his dog will want to get out there and start doing their various research bits, especially if they can send them out there for less than $1 million. Yes, there'll be plenty of takers, as far as I can see. But the question is the money. It's always the money at the end of the day. How do they keep that money, keep the spice flowing, so that they can keep doing the research and the development work necessary? I mean, they're trying to put out as much development as possible to other groups and seeing what they can draw in. But at the end of the day, they really need to concentrate on that rocket. And it's money is always a problem, especially if you have a low launch cadence. They need to increase their launch cadence to get the money flowing. So I hope to see that later on this year. Fingers crossed.
All right. And by the way, Chris, you have a book out that people might want to check out, right?
Well, yes, although I would say to them, you might want to hold on just a week or two, as I'm rapidly trying to put in all the new information we've just learned at the IAC. So, my book, SpaceX from the Ground Up, it's Amazon and Create Space. I'm just doing the rewrite right now, so hopefully I'll have a new edition in a couple of weeks' time. So,
okay. All right. Well, I look forward to that. Give me a link when you put it out so I can publicize
Absolutely.
it. Okay. Well, my own thoughts here are, of course, I want this all to work. I'm not sure it's actually going to be SpaceX that makes it happen, but I'm glad we're having this conversation. And I'm glad that Elon Musk and his team are putting out an idea which is bold and which on paper works. But of course, as we mentioned, there's a lot of unsolved problems. And nobody knows where the money's going to come from. Where ultimately I think the money's going to come from is an economy that doesn't rely that heavily on Earth for its trade and exchange, but that economy doesn't exist yet. And bootstrapping that up will be a very, very complex, difficult, messy process that none of us right now can foresee, and it might not even work at all. I mean, let's face it. But just going back to Darwin, right? Whoever does figure out how to do it is going to be the ones that are there, and the ones that are there are going to make it happen and are going to govern and determine what happens next. So what Elon Musk and his team want to do is get there first and be the ones that are there. The risks are very high. The safety culture is going to have to be very different from what we're used to for NASA missions. And so there's an awful lot of unsolved unknowns, and I like that. I wish there were more things like that around. And, I agree with Sam, this day and age where you can't look around and not see Donald Trump's ugly face. It's good to talk about the far future. And Chris, Roger, are you there at all? I think we've lost Roger. We've had some technical glitches tonight. Apologize for that. Well, okay, this has been episode 60 of the Unseen Podcast. Next one will be episode 61 to be recorded on October 14th. That'll be roughly the anniversary of the Boyajian et al. Paper on what's sometimes known as Tabby star, Boyajian star, or the WTF star, this very mysterious star that we discovered by the planet hunters that we still don't understand where those very, very large dips in its brightness come from. It's been a lot of interesting speculation about that. We will talk about that at the next episode. Our panel is under selection now. We just sent out the advice for episode 62, which will be a Halloween episode, which will be completely different from that. We'll have some fun with that. We'll talk about strange, spooky, weird things, and just laugh and probably drink too much during that recording of the episode. If you want to be on the panel for episode 63, it's not too late. Come join us at our Google Plus community, and you will get an invitation to that. You must join the next 2 weeks to get episode 63. There's only a few more episodes left this year. We're going to take a bit of a break in December and January, and we'll start up again mid-January. So we hope to hear from you. If you have any comments on this episode or any other episode, as I mentioned, this is our 60th episode. Go to unseenpodcast.com to learn more, and then you can come to our subreddit for listeners, or you can come to our Google Plus community, or you can just email unseenpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, know what you think. What are your ideas about SpaceX, about Mars, about the future of humanity in the solar system? Where should we go from here? And let's get that discussion going. As I said, it's about having this conversation now, and conversation about taking bold steps, not timid steps, to get us to Mars. And let's face it, it's not going to be safe for whoever goes there first. So let's have that conversation. Come on over and let's talk to us. Get on a panel for the Unseen Podcast. We have lots of panel openings coming up. Get on there. We record every 2 weeks, and we'd love to hear from you, the listener. If you want to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/unseenpodcast, and you can learn how you can support us on a monthly basis. We'd appreciate that very much. Our costs are not very high, but just a very small donation will help quite a bit. So again, I'd like to thank Chris Profit and
no problem.
Roger Wehbe, who we seem to have lost, and Sam Lichtenstein. And we will be back in 2 weeks to talk about Tabby Star. And looks like Chris needs to take a nap. and so we'll say goodnight now. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Goodbye.